This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. At first, there was 16. Then there was 8. And now there is 4. As we start to that great journey where it's the Eastern Conference Finals and the Western Conference Finals, respectively. And you really, listen, you can toss it up wherever you want when it comes to the Western Conference Finals. The Eastern Conference, I think everybody pretty much already knew who were the two teams that were going to ultimately meet. But in the Western Conference, I'm sure, and we'll get into that when we discuss our conference finals preview and we do our going on get. But I don't think anybody was utterly surprised at the potential Western Conference Finals matchup. And it's just an excellent time now as we start talking about the 4 best teams in the NBA, respectively, in the postseason, ready to duke it out. So you know I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Dime Mag contributor, right up one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna and PNC, brother for another mother, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holler back at me, Mr. Shaw. What's going on, man?
What's up, man? Happy to be here. Salute to all the fans, listeners on the Baseline once again. Getting ready for this conference finals preview. Like you said, man, it's been a long road for the last month or so getting into these playoffs, but we are finally down to the nitty-gritty right before we get to the NBA finals themselves. 4 teams have acquitted themselves extremely well to get them to this point, and we need to give them their proper due and get right to the discussion, my brother.
Yeah, most definitely, man. And listen, not to take anything away from the other 12 teams that had an opportunity to put themselves in this position, but really it comes down to, the cream of the crop. And ultimately you have multiple all-stars on all rosters. You've got arguably, top 10, at least 4 or 5 players, top 10 players in the NBA representing in this Eastern and Western Conference Finals matchups, respectively. It just makes for great basketball. I know a lot of people are a little bit down on the matchups that happened in the first and second rounds, respectively. But we got to, listen, the cream rises to the top, and that's what we have here. And in this show, man, let me talk about cream, talk about rising to the top. We have got a great show for you. Of course, in our segment of the breakdown, we got to talk about the matchup between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Toronto Raptors for the Eastern Conference Finals, and then ultimately the Western Conference Finals with the Golden State Warriors and the Oklahoma City Thunder. But we have a great segment that we always like to do every now and again. We like to make sure, keep everybody on their tippy toes when it comes to the history of the game and reminiscing on things that made the game the way it is, that we embrace and appreciate it for what it is now. In our segment of They Reminisce, we have filmmaker, NBA historian, NBA junkie Eric Newman, formerly with Bleacher Report. Now he is a dynamic filmmaker putting together an awesome series of vignettes. One's called Ode to 91. We'll have him on the show in a little bit to talk about that and really why 1991 is such an important time in the NBA, our culture, and our era for you and yours truly. Of course, we have our coveted Coast to Coast where we discuss all of the news happening in the association, and we definitely have some news to go over with you. So we got a great show lined up in our segment. Also, the drop, it's that time, man, of the year. Teams got to go on and get Spurs, Blazers, and ultimately the Miami Heat. We'll do a season end wrap up on all 3 of those teams, all this and more. And we appreciate every single one of y'all tuning into the Baseline. You know how to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. But we always encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA_the baseline. Hashtag up the baseline. Let us know who you are and what you're about. In case you didn't know about the Baseline NBA podcast, be sure to check it out. We recently just had an excellent interview with Cassidy Hubbard from ESPN NBA Tonight. And as we lead into another great interview with Eric Newman, we encourage you to check out our previous episodes. Drop a comment, give us a rating, let us know what you think about the show. We've been doing this thing for 3+ years, man, and it doesn't look like the engine's going to stop anytime soon. So we always encourage you to give us your thoughts, comments, and concerns, because we love talking NBA with you. Available on the major platforms, available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Player FM, Microsoft TuneIn. So we encourage you to download any one of those platforms and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things NBA. You know how we like to do, and you know how we like to set this off. It is time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down. I break it down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And as we said earlier in the show, man, already, first there was 16, then there was 8, and now there's 4, Shaw. And I think everybody wanted this to happen. I think everybody recognizing the dynamics of the 4 teams remaining now as they're vying for an opportunity to play in the NBA Finals. Respectively, the Eastern Conference Finals matchup between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Toronto Raptors, arguably the 2 best teams in the Eastern Conference, really from the beginning to the end of the season. And then you have the Western Conference Finals matchup, the Golden State Warriors, a historic run, 73 wins, and the Oklahoma City Thunder, which, listen, there were varying opinions on whether or not it was going to be the Oklahoma City Thunder. Many people believed that it really was going to be the Oklahoma City Thunder, despite what their record would look like. It was a matter of whether or not this team could come together. And their road to get there was not going to be an easy one, because ultimately they had to play against everyone who was saying may have been the second best team in the NBA, but that was only really through the regular season. Look, the lights flipped on for Westbrook and for Durant, and they were able to turn this thing on and figure out a way to get the Thunder past the San Antonio Spurs, who had a remarkable regular season. So, Shaw, let's go ahead and start off with the Western Conference Finals matchup, because I think that's where everyone's eyes are going to be fixated and glued upon. This is a Golden State Warriors team that's obviously battle-tested, and the Oklahoma City Thunder team that may have recognized and understand truly who they are. And maybe it took getting through or getting past the San Antonio Spurs for that promise to be realized.
Yeah, one absolutely correct, man. I think OKC really acquitted themselves extremely well in that semifinal versus San Antonio Spurs. As you mentioned, nobody saw that coming. Nobody did. I think we had OKC losing in 6, maybe or 7, but they really were able to find that mojo that they needed, especially with Westbrook trying to figure out what he needed to do, when he should score, when he should be a playmaker. And KD obviously dominating throughout the entire series. Those 2 players really did what they needed to do for OKC to advance, and then getting contributions from Ibaka and Kanter. I'm very impressed with OKC in general, just beating the Spurs. But as I said, that wasn't their championship. They now have to go in here and take out the best team in the NBA in the regular season. And they don't have home court advantage against this team as well. So will they be able to do it? Will Billy Donovan, again, be able to maneuver and come up with the lineups that are necessary that can beat Golden State? I'm very intrigued to see that, because I think we all underestimated what OKC was going to be able to do, especially from a coaching standpoint.
I don't want to get too much into what's going on with the San Antonio Spurs and why they were not able to get past the Oklahoma City Thunder, as much as I am looking at this for what it really represents. The San Antonio Spurs was the best defensive team in the NBA basically throughout. And even in the regular season, we saw the Oklahoma City Thunder have difficulty being able to score with a level of consistency. And everybody knows what's, the style of offense, so to speak, is pretty vanilla. Get the ball to Westbrook, get the ball to Durant, and then everybody else falls into place. What are we expecting from Steve Kerr that's going to deter from what the San Antonio Spurs were ultimately supposed to be doing in this semifinal matchup that they couldn't accomplish really through at least 4 of the 6 games that they played?
Well, I think with Golden State, it's funny because San Antonio team defensively was one of the better teams we've seen in the NBA. In NBA history, actually. But I think Golden State does match up slightly better because of the size and their ability to switch so many different guys on the different players, or the only 2 players really that OKC has on a regular basis. So they'll try to hide Curry for the most part, where he won't have to go up against the vibrance of Westbrook. But when you have Clay and Barnes and Draymond and those guys who are able to kind of stick it to them and play physical and do those same things against KD as well, Golden State seems to be able to match up well. Then bringing in Iguodala off the bench as well, that should help them from a defensive standpoint. The thing about it, though, really is it's going to be Westbrook attacking every single time and putting pressure back on that defense, and harassing Curry when he's on defense on that side of the basketball. So So, that's one of the matchups I do want to watch out for, especially, again, going back to Coach Donovan and what he decides. Does Roberson, does he switch off? Does he play Curry? Does he play Clay? Does he play Durant? Where does he look to try to stop the Golden State attack? And I think a lot of that needs to be focused on Draymond Green as well. So I know we'll talk about, the matchups and the keys when it comes down to this series, but I am very interested to see how Donovan adjusts, because I think I did not expect him to coach as well as he did in the semifinals against Greg Popovich.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. This is the breakdown segment, and we're going through the Western Conference Finals preview between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Golden State Warriors. Shaw, when we talk about this Warriors basketball team, and I said this from the very beginning, if this team is expecting to repeat as the NBA champions, their defense has to take it up another level. Now, I'm not saying that their defense is not considered a top 10 defense. I still believe that their defense is a top 10 defense. It's just they never played that way consistently through the course of the regular season. So it tells me that they have that their best defensive play is yet to come, so to speak. It isn't as if this team just doesn't know how. I just don't know if they put as much emphasis. Now, in a series like this, where the Oklahoma City Thunder likes to run, likes to pick up the pace, which could ultimately play back into the hands of the Golden State Warriors, kind of laxing on that side of the basketball. How important do you think defense is going to be for this Golden State Warriors team in order to make sure that they secure their place getting themselves to the NBA Finals over the Thunder?
Well, I like what you said there, because when it comes down to pace in an NBA game, there's an old adage that, teams that run like Golden State and even like OKC don't like to be run against. So I think you're going to see the turnover battle be really important in this series, whether it's not who's going to be able to get out and get easy baskets. And from both teams' standpoint, not even Golden State or OKC, both teams, they need to be able to figure out how to minimize the turnovers and if their defense is going to lock in. Golden State specifically, because as I said earlier, they have guys who can switch, multiple guys who are willing to defend the different positions and things that OKC can throw at them. I think Kerr and Golden State they won the season series 3-0, and OKC had a lead in all fourth quarters of those games and weren't able to close it out. But you just wonder if Thunder are turning that corner, if you will, and if this is a team now that understands how to win and understanding that they're going to have to win on the road in order to get past the Golden State Warriors. But that all said, I still think the Warriors have the best chance to defeat OKC, and I don't think their defense is going to be as much as a problem as it has been going out through the regular season.
I think it's going to be really interesting, Shaw, when we talk about, and you use you coined the phrase turning the corner. I was more so looking at, will Kevin Durant turn the corner? Because we've said ultimately Kevin Durant needs to play like he is the best basketball player on that court. And listen, many people can say that Steph Curry, is the best basketball player in the NBA. You can make the argument that LeBron James ultimately is the best player, but the fact that we never talk about Kevin Durant in that light, and it's really only been a few years removed, really tells you whether or not his mindset is about truly being great. And I think in this series against the San Antonio Spurs, we got to see him elevate himself to that level of greatness, because the first two games, all we were talking about was LaMarcus Aldridge, and then how quickly things turn itself around when you drop some 35-plus point performances, a 40-plus point performance, and critical shots down the stretch, especially against arguably one of the best defenders in the NBA right now in Kawhi Leonard, who is a two-time defensive defensive player of the year. So my thing is that can this be sustained when we're talking about Kevin Durant turning the corner, so to speak? Because at least when you talk about the Golden State Warriors, if it's not going to be Steph Curry, we've seen Klay Thompson be that guy in the fourth quarter, and we've seen Draymond Green be that guy. We've even seen Andre Iguodala be that guy. It just seems like the Golden State Warriors have multiple players who can be their Steph Curry when it matters the most.
Again, I think that's another interesting point, because Durant heard all the criticism going on throughout that series against the San Antonio Spurs, that Kawhi might be better than him and this, that, and the third. And I don't think he's paying attention to that or if he was buying into it, but it was somewhat of a motivating factor because OKC wanted to get past San Antonio, obviously, and prove that this is a team that is formidable and a team that should be reckoned with. And they said it all along. I remember Westbrook way back in January when asked, "Hey, are you upset that no one's talking about you? Everyone's talking about San Antonio and Golden State." And he said, "Hey, this is where we want to be, just kind of under the radar. We know how good we are." And they proved that against San Antonio. Now they have to prove it again. But to your point, there's a very interesting caveat to this. Like, those two guys are mega stars. I keep saying two of the top 5 players in the NBA. Wherever you want to place them is where you place them. But they still need somebody to show up consistently on a night-to-night basis who's going to be that third scorer for them. Cantor struggled at times, and he was that for times. Steven Adams played huge in the semifinals, giving them multiple double-doubles and even jarring back at Westbrook at times when he wasn't getting the basketball. Those two guys have to be able to contribute for them on a regular basis, and especially if they're going to play on the same court as Donovan played them in the last 3 games of the series. Another guy you're looking at obviously is Dion Waiters too. He can be a contributor off the bench. So OKC needs to find consistent scoring outside Durant and Westbrook, and that seems to be the same song we've been singing for the last 4 or 5 years with this team. They're very, very good, but those two guys always seem to be trying to do it by themselves. Can they get somebody else to contribute, especially in a big conference finals with the NBA championship potentially on the line?
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It's our segment of the breakdown as we discussing the Western Conference Finals, the Golden State Warriors, the Oklahoma City Thunder. So with that being said, Shaw, who do you have? How many games? Where are we talking with this?
Well, I mean, it's hard to pick against the Warriors, especially with Golden State. I love what OKC has done in dispatching the Spurs and the maturity that they've shown. But Golden State is just a buzzsaw. They care not for what you feel like your goals and missions are. They have their own goals and missions that they're trying to get done. And with Curry back, even if he's 75, 80%, that team is still the best team in the NBA to me. So I think it's Golden State in 6. Maybe 7 games, but I definitely like the Warriors in this one. With it still being very, very competitive, I don't predict any blowouts or anything like that. But still, the Warriors in 6 or 7.
Yeah, it's really hard to imagine me thinking that the Oklahoma City Thunder can sustain what they did against the San Antonio Spurs and carry that into Golden State with expectations to pull out 4 victories. I believe that this Golden State Warriors team still plays with an attitude and a chip on their shoulder, much maligned than from what I saw from the San Antonio Spurs team. I felt like the Spurs probably should have felt like there just should be a chip on their shoulder. And I think the most telling sign was the fact that for a team that only lost 1 game in the regular season at home, they lost 2 critical games at home, allowing the Oklahoma City Thunder to really steal this series away. Not to take anything away from the fact that the Oklahoma City Thunder really were the better team, but when you saw the first 2 games of this series, to me, it just felt like the San Antonio Spurs, again, they have these lulls. I don't know where it comes from, but it happened to them against the Los Angeles Clippers. It ultimately happened again to them against the Oklahoma City Thunder a few years ago as well, too. This just seems to be the MO at times, even as great as a team is and how accomplished they can be. But that being said, I think the matchup here is what may equalize that mantra, that nature. So it's going to take a gargantuan effort from both Westbrook and Durant, if that's whose shoulders they're going to rely upon. If they don't figure out a way to balance out their dependency on their other role players, I'll just chalk it up to the fact that the Golden State Warriors are just too deep, too strong, and will ultimately run the Thunder out of the gym, whether it be 6, even 7 games. Ultimately, it's just going to come down to too many bodies that the Warriors have to execute, and I'm predicting that it's going to wind up being the Warriors in 6. Shaw, let's go ahead and focus our attention to the Eastern Conference Finals matchup. Listen, one heck of a performance by the Toronto Raptors to get themselves to this point. First time in franchise history that they will be participating in the Eastern Conference Finals. But man, you talk about trying to rear destiny in the right direction. You could not have found a more difficult task and challenge yourself with than that team that hangs over there in the land with LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, it's more like congratulations. You've won 2 7-game series back to back. Having home court advantage. Your prize, hey, LeBron James and Cleveland Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference. That sucks. That sucks if you're the Toronto Raptors, but they've been doubted and tried the entire season. I predicted that, they would not be able to beat Miami, especially since with the Heat having the experience and a leader not even just a leader, a Hall of Fame player in Dwayne Wade. But they weren't able to get it done. And Toronto, Lowry and DeRozan in particular, the last 3 or 4 games of the series really figured out how to play basketball again and get their shots, get back into their comfort zones, and they were able to win. And they now advance and have a formidable test, and LeBron James and the Cavs in front of them. Defense is going to be the key to this, and big key for the Raptors as well is whether or not Valanciunas comes back. If he does come back, say game 2 or game 3, and he's able to play on that bad ankle, gives him a major presence inside, especially against Tristan Thompson, who's a nice defender. But I think Valanciunas will be able to go through him if he's able. Again, that's if he's healthy enough to play in the series at all.
Yeah, look, the one thing that I think that stands out to me about this Toronto Raptors team is that they stayed true to who they were, and they didn't try to completely change too much just simply because the Miami Heat made adjustments. Miami Heat were forced into a situation once they lost Hassan Whiteside that they ultimately had to play small ball, and unfortunately, that was just a situation where the smaller lineup wasn't. It isn't like a smaller lineup of the Golden State Warriors or even a smaller lineup of the Oklahoma City Thunder. I mean, ultimately, there were guys that were playing in roles and positions I just don't think that they were equipped to do against a much more veteran savvy like type Raptors team who knows how to hold their own. And listen, give credit to guys like Bismack Biyombo, Patrick Patterson. They look like guys that ultimately played big in times when they really should be playing small. And that really helped this Raptors team. Now, how does that translate to playing against the Cleveland Cavaliers? To me, ultimately, you cannot change the way you are and what got you to this particular point. To do that, I think, will be at the detriment of the Toronto Raptors to give themselves even an opportunity to even be in this series against the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think that they need to continue to play bully ball, even if the Cleveland Cavaliers chooses to play with the smaller lineup, which Tyronn Lue loves to do, and having LeBron playing at the 5 at times or having Love play at the 5 at times. And so ultimately, if you're the Toronto Raptors, you've got to stay true to who you are, keep your identity if you're expecting to give yourself a chance in this series.
Yeah, well, they got blindsided, I think, in Game 6 with the Heat in that small lineup with Winslow playing the center spot, and miraculously did not only out-rebounded Miami by two rebounds in Game 6, but Game 7, they get 18 offensive rebounds, multiple second chance points, and they were able to adjust. I don't know how much small ball we'll see with the Cavs, and even still, their small ball is nothing. It's nothing like what Miami was throwing at them. Kevin Love at the 5 is a lot different than Justice Winslow at the 5. So I think they will be able to stick to their guns and play Biyombo and, again, Valanciunas if he's healthy, and they should be able to go out here and try to keep the Cavaliers off the glass and keep them from getting second chance points, because the last thing you need is LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, or Love getting second chance opportunities, for 3-point shots or finding guys, to create shots and cutting to the basket. They have to control the rebound battle in this series, no matter what. Cleveland's going to shoot threes. Cleveland's going to make threes, but you cannot allow them to get second chance opportunities. So for me, that's where Toronto needs to focus their basketball, for the most part. Keep Cleveland off the glass, do not give them any second chance points.
Well, let me add something onto that point too as well, Shaw. I really believe that this also comes down to that backcourt matchup. If everybody's talking about DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry and the fact that, they were just shooting horrifically so far in this series. And ultimately, these guys have breakout performances to get them through Game 7 and ultimately into the Eastern Conference Finals. But I think the one thing that stands out more than anything about their performance in Game 7 is these guys finally started playing aggressive basketball. I don't know why this seems to be so difficult for those guys. I don't think that the teams that they've played against, be it the Pacers or even here against the Miami Heat, that there was this big challenge. I think they're fighting themselves. If these guys are as aggressive as they have been in Game 7, I think they were at the free throw line somewhere in the neighborhood of like 15 times before they even got to halftime. I mean, so that tells me something. It means they were drawing fouls. And ultimately, that's what you're going to need to do. You cannot allow Kyrie Irving to drop 20 and to basically most of his energy and effort is on the offensive end, and he does nothing on the defensive end. Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan need to put the pressure on the Cleveland Cavaliers to step up and play defense, which is always going to be their Achilles heel because they're not a great defensive team. They have a great defensive player in LeBron James, but he cannot shoulder that team to play better defense. And unless the Raptors start playing much more aggressively with their backcourt combination, they don't give themselves a chance. They need to put key guys in foul trouble, force Tyronn Lue to dig into that bench. And I think you'll see matchups that will favor the Raptors in that series.
Well, I mean, I think that's definitely a possibility. Lowry torched the Cavs this year, something to the tune of like 30 points and eight assists a game in the regular season. I don't know how much of that was against Kyrie specifically or Dellavedova or even Mo Williams when he was playing the majority of the minutes to begin the year. But you're right. The Raptors need to continue to be aggressive. They're great at getting to the line. They're great at actually making free throws as well. But for the Cleveland stance, is it Shumpert, who now becomes a very, very key cog in trying to defend and slow down some of that backcourt attack for the Cavaliers? And then same thing with LeBron. His natural matchup in this series is supposed to be DeMar Carroll, but I don't think Carroll is somebody that you need to worry about. So maybe LeBron goes and tries to guard DeMar DeRozan at times and, to try to give him a different look. I'm not saying that he'll guard him 25, 30 minutes a night, but definitely maybe in the fourth quarter in crunch time, you'll see LeBron switch over and try to guard DeMar DeRozan in a smaller role. And again, it really does depend what lineups Ty Lue throws out there, whether LeBron is supposed to be the pseudo 5 or the pseudo 4. Either way, I think from a defensive standpoint, they can cross match and give Toronto some problems when it comes to that side of the basketball.
Well, big up to Dwayne Casey. Listen, I can admit when I'm wrong. I didn't buy into Dwayne Casey being that guy to get them over the hump, but he has done a miraculous job getting these guys playing poised, understanding the moment, and getting them prepared for this. And maybe that could be the equalizer for the Toronto Raptors to give themselves an opportunity, to give themselves a chance. We're not going to talk too much about whether or not the coaching matchups is going to be a key factor, but it could be more key for the Toronto Raptors than it would be for the Cleveland Cavaliers. It seems like the Cleveland Cavaliers have got 3-4 coaches over there other than Tyronn Lue. But when you're talking about the Toronto Raptors, there's only one name right now that stands out that's pretty much kept these guys in the even keel. And he's relied on these guys. He's made some quote unquote questionable decisions from a play calling perspective and even from a rotation perspective. But whatever he's done, it's gotten them to their first Eastern Conference Finals. And take nothing away, Dwayne Casey, in my opinion, you can make the argument is a coach of the year in the playoffs, not the coach of the year in the NBA, but coach of the year in the playoffs to get them to this point. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Shoot, I completely forgot to ask you about the thing, didn't I? Yeah. All right, ready? All right, Shaw. So with that being said, where do you have this series going? What's your take on this? Let me have it.
I like the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it's hard to pick against them. Listen, Toronto Raptors, I think they've had a great run. And as you just mentioned, Casey's done a great job, and they've stuck to their guns in the whole nine, but this is just a different animal. And I don't expect the Cavaliers to continue to shoot lights out from the 3-point line and do all those things that they have. But I just think they're more supremely talented, and they don't struggle offensively like Toronto does and go into those lulls where they just can't get a basket. And I think their defense is still acceptable enough to win it out. So I like the Cavs in 5, maybe 6, but I think this is going to be a pretty quick series. Not just necessarily that it won't be competitive, but I just think Cleveland Cavaliers are playing too well and they're healthy, and they are definitely on a mission when it comes to Eastern Conference. I want to get back to the finals.
All right, for me, Shaw, the level-headed, logical Cal would take the Cleveland Cavaliers in 6 games over the Toronto Raptors. I don't think that the Toronto Raptors have enough firepower for in a best of 7 series against the Cleveland Cavaliers to sustain what they're going to do to win 4 times. But I will say that I think that they are going to be as equally competitive as, say, the Detroit Pistons have. And I think that they have some players that know how to finish. And given the fact that they've been through 2 game sevens already in the playoffs, I'm more confident about their ability to finish if it's within their grasp. Now, that being said, that means that for the Cleveland Cavaliers to make sure that they are going to go to the finals, they need to do like what they did against the Atlanta Hawks, the final 2 games of their series, which is make their run, even if the other team is winning, and ultimately close them out when it matters the most. If they allow a team like the Toronto Raptors to hang around, I feel more confident about the Raptors probably winning the game than I am worrying about whether or not the Cleveland Cavaliers should or shouldn't be blowing out this team. So to me, Logic Cal has the Cavaliers in 6. But who knows what kind of Cal, if you ask me this question later on in the show, might tell you something really extreme, crazy, almost like there's a conspiracy or Calspiracy theory thing going on. I'm just saying.
My God, man, I'm afraid to find out. I don't even think I want to know. But I do agree with one thing you said there for sure. Especially watching Game 7, Toronto was able to hit shots late. And they just were able to kind of ride that wave, if you will. And I think they have better shot makers than the Atlanta Hawks did, and they weren't able to sustain their leads late in the game. So the Raptors, as bad as they have been throughout the playoffs, and then as much as Lowry and DeRozan have struggled specifically, when they start to roll and start to click, they are pretty formidable, and they're better than anybody Atlanta has from an offensive standpoint. So I can definitely see that. If Toronto gets ahead in the series and, it comes down to a late game in the fourth quarter, I feel much more confident and secure about them being able to pull out a win than I did the Atlanta Hawks.
See, man, it's okay to jump on my side every now and again. You wouldn't be deemed crazy. You know what I'm saying?
I'm not all the way there.
I know.
I see where you're going.
Leave the lunacy to me. But for right now, it's good to be normal. It's good to be normal. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, The Baseline NBA podcast. And hey, man, 3 more teams have now found themselves on the outside looking in, no longer able to continue that dream to get to the NBA Finals and ultimately win an NBA championship. So unfortunately, man, it's that time of the show. We got to kind of wrap it up for these teams because, it's time for them to just go on and get, man. And look, we're going to start with the first team that got ousted earliest, that being the Portland Trailblazers. Let's take nothing away from what the Portland Trailblazers exhibited, not just in the regular season, but even in the playoffs. I know, people are talking about, well, they probably wouldn't have gotten out of the first round because the Los Angeles Clippers lost Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. You know what? The Portland Trailblazers don't have any control over guys falling to injury on the opposing team. And if you are a basketball team that is playing in the NBA playoffs, you should not be worried about what the other team has and doesn't have. Your mission is to get past that team and to continue your NBA postseason. That's exactly what the Blazers did. And the Blazers actually showed to be a marketably improved team as they furthered themselves into the playoffs. You don't believe me? Why don't you go ask the Golden State Warriors, who ultimately needed Steph Curry to come back and basically put on one of the greatest postseason performances in the NBA history in order to at least solidify that they are still the team to beat out of the West. Shaw, when you talk about this Portland Trailblazers team, make no bones about it. This team legitimately is going to be a threat when you have Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum as your backcourt.
100%. They were the second highest scoring backcourt in the NBA, and I think third best duo, or if you will, in the NBA behind Westbrook and Durant. And the future is bright. But you have to listen to what they were saying at their post-game presser after they were defeated at the hands of the Warriors. They understand that they need more talent on this team, that those 2 guys cannot be not necessarily like the only guys on the team shooting, but they don't want to have to shoulder the load all the time. They need somebody else, a la like Westbrook and Durant, who can come in now and be a consistent third scorer for them, and even maybe so a little bit of the playmaking. Listen, Lillard and McCollum, as great as they are, they're not terribly efficient, and that's because they don't have the pieces around them. But give them credit for getting to Portland Trailblazers, and give Terry Stotts a lot of credit for getting the Blazers to where they got to this year. Injuries aside, Lillard was the only returning starter. I mean, how many times do we have to say that? He was the only returning starter, and this team made it to the semifinals and gave the Golden State Warriors all they can handle in that matchup. Lots of questions for them going into the summer. They have a couple guys who are free agents, only $56 million in estimated cap space, an estimated allotted cap for them next year. They're going to lose Gerald Henderson, who was a nice contributor for them. They got to figure out what they're going to do with Myers Leonard and Maurice Harkless. Are they going to tender offers to them for qualifying offers to bring them back for a fifth year? A couple things they really need to figure out there. Alan Crabb is also going to be a free agent, and he was big for them, and especially in the playoffs. So we'll see what they do, but I don't think that the Portland Trailblazers are going to rest on their laurels. They have two great pieces, as you alluded to, and really should be a destination for free agent interest, especially based on what they were able to accomplish this year.
Well, one of the things that you said, Shaw, that I think stands out more than anything is that they have to upgrade their talent. And I'm just curious, Shaw, when we talk about upgrading the talent, most teams usually what that equates to is going out and signing guys, right? And it may mean replacing the core guys that got you to where you are. You talk about guys like Miles Plumlee and Mason Plumlee. You talk about guys like Al-Farouq Aminu. And my whole thing is that, these guys are still relatively young, Plumlee especially. It's important, yes, to keep Myers Leonard, but I'm just curious from your perspective, Shaw, who of it in this core group of guys, regardless of staying or going, needs to take the next step forward to really help secure what we're talking about here in order to elevate this team, to stabilize them for what they were able to accomplish this past season?
Well, I think that's an interesting question for the Blazers because they have some nice pieces who just have seemed to fit well together, and they really rallied around Stotts and even Lillard and McCollum to have that collegiate mentality, if you will, and that me against the world mantra that was able to propel them into the playoffs this season. Where they need help primarily is on the wing at the three position, and whether or not they bring back. I mean, Amino's coming back regardless, but is he really a three, or can he continue to be and evolve into a stretch four? I think that's something that they need to figure out, as well as Maurice Harkless. What are they going to do there? I love what you're saying about Plumlee. I think he's a great energy guy. He's proven that he can also be a distributor and as mobile as a big man, but he still needs to develop some sort of shot and some post moves and some footwork down the block. You can't just be a guy who gets rebounds and then puts it back at all times or dives to the rim. At some point, you have to be able to create some offense down there for them. So I think those are the two areas where they need to focus on the most: trying to get some post scoring and also getting a viable wing outside of what Lillard and McCollum bring to them in the backcourt.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our segment's the segment of The Drop, as we discuss teams who have been eliminated in the postseason. The Portland Trailblazers, the first one that we're in discussions with. And let's go ahead and focus our attention on the team that got ousted, Shaw, that I'm sure a lot of people were very surprised by. I don't think I was necessarily as surprised as much as I was very much concerned with, because the San Antonio Spurs have been ousted, and they were ousted in the fashion that they were ousted, now all of a sudden we start talking about, is this the end of the road of the big three with Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, and Tim Duncan? And I think more so, a lot of people's concerns are whether or not Tim Duncan should continue to play basketball. It's funny because it almost seems like people have this alter ego in trying to validate the case for Tim Duncan to continue to play because of what he displayed in the regular season, as much as how badly he played in this series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, Shaw. I mean, this type of loss, where does the bitterness really settle? Does it settle in the disappointment of not making it to the Western Conference Finals to give themselves a chance, or is it really settled in the fact that this could really be the end of the road of one of the great dynasties that a foundation of dynasties that the Spurs and in the NBA has seen in 20 years?
It's a great $1 million question when it comes to the Spurs and what Duncan is going to do, what Ginobili is going to do. They both have player options, and they've earned that as a result of their years of dedication to the San Antonio Spurs organization. But I do feel like this is a team that doesn't feel like they achieved what they really were capable of doing, and they just fell short here in the semifinals against a very game OKC team. Duncan and Ginobili are going to be huge keys, but if they do come back, they're going to come back at minimum deals or for affordable contracts that the Spurs can still be able to maneuver with or without them. I think the key here is going to be what happens to the status of Tony Parker, who definitely was starting to show his age in this series, and then even Danny Green, who I don't know if they're going to have any type of buyer's remorse on. $10 million doesn't seem like a lot of money in today's NBA, but what he had a horrible season, as we've chronicled throughout our show during the regular season. Stepped it up a little bit here in Game 1 and Game 2 of the semifinals, but really wasn't the guy that they had hoped he would be, and even the guy he was last year from the outside perimeter. So I think the Spurs are going to be looking at some changes. Duncan and Ginobili, they'll be able to do whatever they want to do. And they'll be welcomed back or they'll be sent off, with the hero send-off one way or the other. But I really am looking to see what they do with the rest of this roster. Did they try to bring in now another third core piece around Aldridge and Leonard, who are going to be there for the long haul?
I got to tell you, Shaw, you bring up an excellent point regarding Danny Green. And, I've said for, really the longest time that while I like Danny Green, I can only take him in doses. Yet Greg Popovich felt compelled to run him out there like he's one of the regular starters, deserving of 30-something plus minutes. And it's just interesting to me because, we often talk about how sometimes the player makes the system and the system can make the player. And I feel like Danny Green being in the San Antonio system has allowed him to be viewed as and seen as, this clutch quality player. It's interesting to me. We often would probably be criticizing him because of the fact that he's been in the league for as long as he's been in the league, and he's still very much a one-dimensional player. His defense, yes, has improved, but it'll never be anywhere near that of the caliber of Kawhi Leonard. Not quite sure why. His athleticism when he came out of North Carolina has always been there, but he's just a mercurial type of player, man, that I just can't seem to place my finger on. And to your point, when they needed him the most to help offset the lack of productivity that Tony Parker was giving them from that backcourt, put the shoulder on Kawhi Leonard to do all that he's been doing up to this particular point. I think it's too much to ask for. And if I think that there's going to necessarily be a major change that has to take place, it has to be with Popovich looking for someone who's going to be able to help balance out that backcourt. Because I just can't see that combination of Parker and Danny Green being a successful combination going into this next season, and especially if you're not allowing Kawhi Leonard to be more of the ball handler, ball facilitator. Something has got to give it with that kind of combination.
Yeah, and the Spurs, they'll figure it out. That's one of the things. They'll find a way to retool. They may be linked to some free agent or some trade that we will never even figure out. I was listening to an earlier podcast, and I think it was Basketball Insiders, and they brought up some things that the Spurs aren't afraid to make hard decisions. And when you think about it, that's true. If they needed to trade Danny Green, if they needed to let go of Boris Diaw in order to create some space or to get other players there, then I think they would do that, as long as it was a player that fit their longevity and fit their tradition and culture and their code, if you will. Guys like Mike Conley come to mind. They've also talked about, obviously, they're going to entertain the idea of getting Kevin Durant, but they need to let go a couple more contracts in order to do so. But I think this Spurs team is going to have a small overhaul. But as we said in the beginning, I don't know if Duncan, Ginobili, and even David West, who also has a player option, I don't think they'll have to be run out of town. They'll just get to come back one way or whether one way or the other. Or if they don't want to return, then so be it. The Spurs will move on. But I'm looking for this team to really make some moves in free agency and potentially in the trade market before the summer's through.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our segment of The Drop, as the San Antonio Spurs disappointing loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder semifinal round matchup of the Western Conference playoffs. And so, unfortunately, as for the San Antonio Spurs, it's time for them to just go on and get. Shaw, finally, the last team that we're going to talk about, and I think to some degree we were a little surprised that this was the team. I think part of it is because people were clamoring for that Eastern Conference Finals matchup between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Miami Heat. But this was just really indicative of a Miami Heat team that probably suffered too much at the wrong time. And ultimately, they just could not put it together when it mattered to most. And to another point of this is way too much shouldering on one person who has ultimately been the face of the Miami Heat for 14 years in Dwayne Wade. To ask him to do what he was able to do in this series is, quite phenomenal. And clearly it's the writing on the wall. But more than anything else, man, Shaw, I think it's just more disappointing that the guys that they had brought them in there for this purpose. They just weren't ready to step up to the task when it mattered the most.
Well, I think that's harsh. I think the Heat got to exactly where they were supposed to get to. I think when we predicted it in the regular season, in the preseason, if you will, how they got here is completely different than how we thought. And I would say that we expected them to have a healthy Chris Bosh and a healthy Hassan Whiteside, and having that veteran leadership with Wade and Bosh and even Luol Deng kind of taking them and propelling them to potentially a semifinals or maybe even an Eastern Conference Finals. But they ended up having to play small and rely on some rookies and Josh Richardson and Justice Winslow to play big minutes for them, and they just kind of wore down. I think Wade and Deng were tired at that, and we looked at them in Game 7.
But Deng is always tired, man.
Well, you can thank Tom Thibodeau for that. But nevertheless, this Heat team, I think they did really, in some degrees, overachieve with their roster when especially losing Bosh at the All-Star break, and then still being very competitive in this series when Whiteside went down. The key for them now is what happens to this roster over the summer. Lots of free agents. Wade himself is a free agent, which people who were saying that he was washed up 2 seasons ago. Now when you go on Twitter, everyone is like, oh my God, thank you, D Wade. Thank you so much for saving our season, X, Y, and Z. Well, D Wade made $20 million last year. He's now a free agent again. Do you think he's going to want his Kobe deal, or was that $20 million his Kobe deal? Or will he be like Tim Duncan and say, you know what, for the better of the organization, I'll take $5 million, I'll take $7 million, I'll take $10 million. Will Wade do that now as his team tries to move forward? Hassan Whiteside, he realizes now how much they need him on the floor for them to be successful. So I think, and then not having his bird rights is a huge detriment to this roster. So Whiteside's going to look to see what he can get, and it's going to take roughly an $18 to $20 million deal to bring Whiteside back. Do you do that if you're Mickey Harrison and Pat Riley? They have traditionally been going away from wanting to spend money and hit that luxury tax threshold, and those are 2 guys who are going to command dollars in free agency. Luol Deng's a free agent. He made $10.1 million this year. Udonis Haslem's a free agent. They've been loyal to him forever now. Do they finally say this is the year that you go? So many questions with this Heat roster, man. I don't know how they're going to rebuild it and with what pieces. But they have that saying that they have down here, Heat lifer and X, Y, and Z. It'll be interesting to see if Riley, Harrison, and the rest of those guys can get other guys and other free agents to buy into that as well.
So where's your confidence meter? Where does it sit with this Heat team as far as being able to put together that rebuilt roster to do what they were able to do this year? Let's let me preface this by saying, Shaw, that like my harsh criticisms is really not geared towards the fact that when you looked at this team on paper that they were supposed to win as many games as the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think my problem still kind of settles in on what I've seen from some of these players that have been a part of this Heat team now for the last couple of years, namely guys like Luol Deng and guys like Amari Stoudemire. I felt like that was the purpose for why they made they signed these guys to bring them here. And I don't know if whether or not this season maybe is a true outlier. What you see is what you get. But I think it's kind of telling that, a lot of the dependency on what these guys were expected to do, they just have not lived up to it. We were harsh on Goran Dragic as far as the money that he made, and look what he was able to do. I mean, I will not, listen, if he's going to put out the kind of performance he did to help get this Heat team to a Game 7 against the Toronto Raptors, you're not going to hear a qualm from me whatsoever. Ultimately, even he now realizes that, I have to unleash the dragon. But, what are we saying about guys like Deng, guys like Amari Stoudemire, and what are the replacements, what are the replacement killers, so to speak, that's going to be necessary to assume that this Heat team can replicate what they just did?
Well, I mean, they need to figure out from a team standpoint, a philosophy standpoint, how they want to play. With Bosh and Whiteside, they can't run up and down the floor and play with the pace that they did post All-Star. If both those guys come back, and that's a big if, they need to go play a little bit more of a plotting style and rely on their defense and kind of get out in spurts. to your point now, that kind of hurts Dragic. You saw Dragic struggled in the beginning part of the year when they were playing that slower pace and running the offense through Bosh a lot. So I think they need to figure out what they want to do with that. And let's not even hide the elephant in the room here. Bosh's status is not 100%. This guy has a recurring medical condition that may prevent him from stepping on the floor ever again. He wants to play, God bless his soul, but he's a smarter guy than that. And if it's really a risk to his life and a really risk to his family and his kids that he has, if he needs to hang it up, then he needs to hang it up. And like I've said on many shows before this, God forbid if the Heat were the team that clears Chris Bosh with the ailing medical condition, and then he were to pass away or something, very ill will happen to him on the floor. No free agent or no player would ever want to come play for this organization again. The Miami Heat have so many things they need to consider this summer. It's not even funny. And again, Bosh being the key to that. But we haven't even mentioned guys like Gerald Green and even Joe Johnson, who's come in there and big help to them. All those guys need to be re-signed as well. They have like 5 or 6 guys under contracts for next year, and 3 major players that they're going to have to pay big money to and start to worry about whether or not Bosh is going to come back. Listen, Riley has been able to get it done in the years past, but this is going to be his biggest challenge yet this summer.
Yeah, Shaw, listen, no matter what's said, the Miami Heat is, if they are able to keep Dwayne Wade, and I know we're not trying to say, I know we don't say this often because for some reason people just have this perception that Dwayne Wade at 34 is like, his better days are behind him. I still think that a Dwayne Wade on a Miami Heat team is still going to be probably the second, maybe even the best team out of that Southeast division, and ultimately will still be a middle of the pack team, as Eric Spoelstra has figured out a way to do with him before Pat Riley went and got Chris Bosh and LeBron James, and they went on that miraculous run. Dwayne Wade is just showing it again. And maybe, you know what, Shaw, maybe to our detriment, we are not appreciating the greatness of Dwayne Wade because of that. I mean, he has suppressed his game to allow others to flourish, to allow him to have 2 additional NBA titles, 2 rings that he could put on his finger. And then now he's able to just flip the switch and suddenly be this great basketball player that we have always been talking about. He's easily going to be a first, ballot Hall of Famer, no question. But I think doing things like what he just did this past season is indicative of that, which may even make the decisions that much tougher for Pat Riley to not, to have to consider in saying, well, we can't let Dwayne Wade just ride off into the sunset. We don't want the Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett experience going around when Dwayne Wade really should be a Heat for life.
Yeah, I can't see Wade ever leaving Miami and being in a different uniform. But he's going to want his fair market value. And he's taking less to let other guys and other players get money. And, he was never the highest paid player on the team ever. At any point of his career, and still not, even with Bosh now having signed his max deal last summer. So listen, he's 34. He is breaking down. He probably wants a 1 or 2 year deal where he can probably just try to get max money, especially with an escalating cap. But if he were to leave, he'd find a way, and his team is very good. And let me say this, his team is very good in terms of his publicist and marketing team. If he were not to return, they'd find a way to make it be about the Heat not wanting to pay him and not respecting him. He played very well in these playoffs and has acquitted himself extremely well when it comes to what he should command in the free agent market, especially being a first ballot Hall of Famer and a Heat lifer.
Well, there you have it, man. The Miami Heat got a lot of work to do in this offseason. Portland Trailblazers, definitely a team that you're going to have to watch for in the next coming years. And the San Antonio Spurs, man, we have no idea what their future may behold for some players. But all we know for the right now on our show, the Baseline NBA Podcast, unfortunately, it's time for these 3 participants.
Go on, get.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
They reminisce over you. Listen.
Time now for They Reminisce. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA Podcast. And we have a really great, excellent guest, really to talk about a time where maybe for my generation and Shaw's generation, we love to have these kind of conversations. I know now with the way that the Golden State Warriors are playing basketball, with the dynasty, the quote unquote dynasty of the Miami Heat, when LeBron James ran the Heat 4 years in a row to the NBA Finals. But I don't think anything can ever top the year 1991. And 25 years ago, we saw, as it was spoken eloquently on Slam Magazine, the passing of the torch, in which we witnessed greatness, really for multiple years. And one particular person really put his emphasis and had his hands knee deep into making sure that he profiled this with utter execution and excellence. He formerly is an NBA lead video producer for Bleacher Report. He is an NBA historian, a video producer, and a filmmaker, but he is just an NBA junkie from the days of being a toddler. And Eric Newman, joins us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Eric, man, thank you so much for joining us. And really, we really appreciate you coming on, because this vignette that you put together really is going to amp up the debate of why people are now talking about the Golden State Warriors, in essence, to try to make these comparisons about the greatness of what the Bulls did back in the 1991 season.
Man, you're roping me into the Warrior talk already?
We didn't want to waste any time, man.
I appreciate the kind words in the intro. It's great to be on with you guys, and obviously a really exciting time of the year now with the conference finals set. But just like you said in your intro, it's great to look back and see what happened in league history, which is of course why we're here in the first place, because of the great history of the NBA.
I want to bring your attention real quick to the idea of how it was being turned as saying, the passing of the torch. And really the emphasis is not just on what Michael Jordan did, but really in the era where we kept talking about guys like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and what they were doing for the NBA. Can you talk a little bit about why the emphasis and passing of the torch was so poignant in your in the way that you were displaying this particular piece?
You started with the Warriors and all the comparisons with the Warriors with this, getting the 73 wins. Obviously, they passed the 96 Bulls, who, of course, went 72-10. But the Bulls dynasty, the first championship, of course, was 91, which is but there was a certain lead up that they had, and there was a certain mountain that they had to climb. And I think that's one reason why I'm so in love with 1980s NBA, because there was a real domino effect, especially in the Eastern Conference. And to tie it quickly to Bird and, of course, Magic in the West, but when Bird and Magic came into the NBA, that other team at the top of the mountain was the 76ers. And the Celtics had to knock off the 76ers in the East in order to, claim what became their conference. The Celtics owned the East, and then, of course, the team that knocked them off were the Detroit Pistons, who became the Bad Boys, and they're the team, along with the Celtics, that kept knocking Jordan down every year in the playoffs. In 86 and 87, it was the Celtics, and then Detroit for 3 years in a row, 88, 89, and, of course, 1990, the Bulls take them to 7 games in the conference finals, and the Pistons win 2 NBA titles. They appear in 3. And 1991, 25 years ago, we're always looking for milestones, celebrations, anniversaries. 25 years ago, Michael Jordan and those Bulls, they officially took that torch from Detroit, and that's where the dynasty was born, which, of course, leads through the first three-peat and the second three-peat for the Chicago Bulls.
So that conversation, I think, is very interesting, because a lot of fans today, the younger fans, don't realize that maturation process that teams have to go through, especially with free agency being what it is. Teams just go out and try to buy 2 or 3 stars and hope that makes them an instant title contender, but they don't go through the long haul like some of these teams, as you mentioned, the Pistons, Celtics, and Bulls all did. They had to overcome their quote-unquote rival to get to that next level and that next step. But this series that you're doing here isn't, like you said, it isn't just about the Chicago Bulls. It really does highlight some of those teams who were kind of on their last run, if you will, especially looking at the Celtics and the Lakers of that era. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What made you make sure you included those points in the features that you're doing with the 0-91?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me about that, because not only is it Jordan taking, and Jordan and the Bulls, of course, he wasn't a one-man show by that point, but they're becoming the team. But Bird and Magic were still fighting to lead their teams, and if not for Bird's back, starting to really, really hinder him the second half of that season, the Celtics were actually side by side with the Bulls, both roughly around 40-14, 54 games through the season, and the Celtics have put together a really interesting team. The growth of Reggie Lewis, the return of Brian Shaw, of course, Bird, Parrish, and McHale. They drafted D. Brown. Ed Pinckney was an underrated player for them. So they had this interesting team where they were getting younger and faster. They got knocked out of the playoffs the year before, which I sprinkled into the piece, by the Knicks in the first round, which for me as a Celtics fan growing up in New York was the worst day ever going to school after that series ended. I was completely tortured by Knicks fans. And that's what happens when you walk around as a pardon my language, a shit-talking Celtic fan. But, the 91 stuff, I'm 37 years old, so you fall in love with the league and you fall in love with just, learning history and seeing history. And, the Larry Bird versus Indiana Pacers game 5 in the first round of the 91 playoffs, which is, the first vignette that Slam was great enough to post and release the other day. I mean, that's the best. It's the best example of what, playing hurt and doing whatever it takes to try to lead your team to win. And that Bird moment stuck with me and still does to this day. Not to criticize players today. It's a different league. It's a different culture. But, show me players today that are in traction and wearing a back brace and then come out and then give themselves a concussion and then come back into the game and do what he did. It's, not to be cliche with the legend nickname, but there's a reason why he's Larry Legend. And, you mentioned young fans, and, I'm around young people all the time. I used to coach my days at Bleacher Report, and I would have people working on NBA stuff, and they had never watched a Magic Johnson or Larry Bird game before. They had only seen Jordan in highlights, never sat down and watched the Jordan game. And I was in disbelief. And, not that we're that old, but, I guess the generational thing is a little bit different. And growing up with the VHS tapes and having to read the books in the school library and not everything at your fingertips, I guess made you do your homework a little bit more. But the 91 era, and what went on there, not just the Bulls, but as you mentioned, the Lakers finding a way to get back to the finals one last time, and Magic Johnson, of course, that was the last full season he played before he had to make that, world global changing announcement that he had HIV in the fall of 91. And, to see those two guys battling one more spring in the playoffs during the same time as when the Bulls rose, thought it was important to include that.
Filmaker and NBA historian Eric Newman joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to check out Ode to 91, a series of vignettes that chronicles the storylines and events of the 1991 NBA playoffs and where the Bulls dynasty ultimately arrived. Definitely go to www.slamonline.com. Eric, one of the things that I have found very interesting and very intriguing is when we use that quote or that moniker, the game within the game. And these vignettes, I think, really puts emphasis on that, because we're talking about not just the ushering of a dynasty within an organization, but the dynasty of how the NBA profiles greatness and the way that we perceive greatness in the game of in the game of players. We talk so much about how Larry Bird and Magic Johnson were part of, I don't want to use that word dying breed. And then here comes Michael Jordan, and it's all wrapped into this one year, this one season, which now just, takes off like no other. For you, when you look at the dynamics of what led to this dynamic NBA playoffs, how important was the season in itself for the Chicago Bulls, for us to take them seriously? We talk about most teams doing this, and it just seems like it's a one-year wonder, or it's going to take another 3 or 4 years before we actually believe them. We talk about, like, even with the Toronto Raptors, how long it's taken them in this modern era. But for the Chicago Bulls, how much did it really happen just for 91, or was just the seeds in place because we were witnessing that greatness leading up into that season?
I think it's one of the true great lead ups that we've seen, as far as a team having to go step by step, grow as individuals, grow as a unit. I mean, they won 61 basketball games that year, and it was the second full year, I believe, with Phil Jackson as the head coach. And, one guy that over time I think has started to get his due, but didn't right away, was Doug Collins, who coached that team before Phil did, and had a lot to do with, Jordan's development and obviously Pippen's development. And, I believe he had Horace Grant there as a rookie. But the build-up and the formation of the team, that took a number of years. And then in 91, I think between them really taking that next step and, the Celtics and Pistons, who still had their veterans and their very, very strong teams, were also, unfortunately, hit by age and injury on the heavy side. It was a challenge for them. But, regardless, the Bulls earned that. It was their time. And, as we've heard many say, it's not easy to win an NBA championship. But for Chicago, I think the regular season, they knew they were gelling on a new level, and the 61 win shows it. And then, of course, their journey through those playoffs was very, very, very dominant. I believe they only lost, fact check this for me, but I believe they only lost 2 games in that entire playoff, leading to the title.
Yeah, I mean, I think you are correct on that. They struggled against the Pacers, and then they actually beat. Looking at it now, they beat the Philadelphia 76ers, took them to 5, so they lost 3 games.
Yeah, the Bulls faced the Knicks in the first round, and it was.
Oh, you're right.
It was the Knicks right before they got Riley, and the most memorable moment from that round is the Jordan hesitation on that baseline when he spins back, and Ewing tries to meet him at the rim. And Jordan has that one-hand dunk on Ewing and just stares him down. And it's one of the great Jordan plays ever. Really? And then Barkley, who was playing at a very, very high level, that was his last good team in Philadelphia. And Chicago handled them in 5. And then, of course, the dismantling of the Pistons. And I'm sure we all saw the Bad Boys 30 for 30, where Isaiah and the crew leave the bench before the end of Game 4, which was so appropriate for a team of such high character human beings, such as the 80s, early 90s.
Nowadays, it's Twitter fodder if it happens, but back then, it was.
I set it up for you, fellas. I set it up for you. You got to take it. That was the for a lifetime Celtic fan. That was the cherry on top of confirming all of my feelings about those guys in the first place. So it was disrespectful to Jordan, to the league, but I'm glad everybody saw them act in that way, because I respect their intensity. I respect what they accomplished, but never was a fan of how they did it.
So definitely what you've done, I want to kind of figure out exactly how many there are going to be, how many vignettes are going to be, how many features are there, because you're looking back at this 91 season and that playoff in particular, you have so many great teams, the Supersonics, and they were so great. The Portland Trailblazers with Clyde and their guys. You mentioned just Barkley. Even the Warriors run that playoff series with Run TMC. How many features? Because there's so many teams in there that really are so important to NBA history, at least especially for guys of our ilk, if you will, and standpoint from the NBA.
So I'm very ambitious. There's a lot of video on the internet, but only so much of it is the quality that I can turn it into something like I did with the trailer, like I did with the Bird Pacers piece. I'm working on Run TMC right now, upsetting the Spurs in the first round, which was a big thing. I mean, the 7 seeds back then, and ironically,
we're legitimate 7 seeds, right?
Right, but the Pacers pushed the Celtics to 5, and the Warriors then they took it to the Spurs. here's the thing that it's going to be really fun about that. And the style technically started in the 80s when Don Nelson did it with those very, very good Bucks teams that don't get enough credit in league history. He won 50-plus games, I think 5 times in the 80s with the Bucks. But then he brings that strategy to Golden State, except now he's got Tim Hardaway, Mitch Richmond, Chris Mullin, and then you throw in Sir Linus Marshallonis in the mix, and all of a sudden the Golden State Warriors in 91 are playing the small ball that we see today. And it was a memorable win for their team, for those individuals, for their fan base. But because it's 25 years ago, and yeah, the games were on cable, and yeah, they were SportsCenter, there wasn't the coverage of it, and it was only a first-round series. So I think when people see some of those highlights and the talent and the pace, they're going to really enjoy going back down that memory lane to the 91 Warriors. And then, of course, the Bulls against the Pistons, the Lakers against the Blazers, the Bulls-Lakers final. The Celtics-Pistons series is a terrific 6-game series from the second round, which was, of course, the last time those heated rivals played each other, but there's not a lot of video out there on it. So I'm still trying to figure out what to do with that one. But that was a series the Celtics were up 2-1 in that series and could have had it. And the Pistons won an impressive Game 5 in Boston to go up 3-2, and Game 6 in Detroit. It's actually a great playoff game where the Celtics came back from 17 down, and the game went to overtime, and some physical play, some controversial play down the stretch, but not a lot of game tape. So I'm still digging there. So to answer your question, shorthand, it'll probably be around 5 vignettes total.
Eric Newman joining us here. Be sure to check him out on Instagram at Coach E New. He's also available on Twitter with the same handle as well too. Coach, just a couple more questions here before we let you go and usher us into the Steven Spielberg-esque of our ability to appreciate basketball. And this is so far an excellent job on your part to not just to put emphasis, but to remind us so that there's a level of balance. I tend to think that at times we get so consumed within our own era that we don't take enough time to kind of look back on what's led up to this particular point and where the NBA is transitioned. So I'm curious, the 0-91, when you look at what this should mean, what would be the next significant bookmark, so to speak, where we put emphasis on some of the great things that we have seen in the NBA in this between this 25-year span between what the 1991 NBA season and the playoffs represent to what we are now witnessing. And we're not talking about just from a dynasty perspective, but I'm just talking about from an importance of understanding where the game is and what it should mean leading up to this point. What would you think would be the next bookmark and possible next project for the great filmmaker Eric Newman?
It's a flattering lead-in. Thank you. These original kind of turning point postseasons or time periods, this thought process actually started for me in 2013 going into 2014, because that was the 30th anniversary of Commissioner Stern becoming commissioner, and the 84 finals was the first Bird Magic final, which of course changed everything, and the television strategy and the way CBS did the games. And that's where the thought process started. It just so happened that, this postseason happened to be 25 years. So 91 was a great place. I mean, the 90s are such a great era because you had a lot of these new emerging faces, but the same intensity and rivalries that we all fell in love with during the 80s. So, I mean, it would have to be the era of the second three-peat for the Bulls, I think, would probably be the next thing. And, now you've got my wheels turning as to all the things that would entail, but, not to knock the NBA in any way, but in 94 and 95, And of course, Jordan was back for the playoffs in '95, but it didn't. The playoffs were exciting. The Knicks-Rockets final was obviously not the prettiest basketball, but from competition standpoint and intensity, it was great. And of course, that Knicks-Pacers series in '94 is one of the great forgotten conference finals, I think, in league history. So there's a lot there. There's a lot there. I think I'm just scratching the surface with this one because the timing works so well. Obviously, it's an era that had a lot to do with molding my love for the game as a teenager, and it was easy for me to start there. So not to dodge your question, but there's a few different things in the '90s that I could do next. The real and the interesting thing from a fan standpoint is after Reggie Lewis passes in the summer of 1993. The Celtics are irrelevant for the rest of the decade. And, I'm a diehard Celtics fan, but with so much going on, with Jordan coming, going, returning, and those thrilling moments in the finals, I think the Western Conference, that tug of war for power between Barkley's Suns, the Rockets, the Sonics, the team that they should have been. One of my former colleagues is from Seattle, and we used to talk about all the time what the '96 Sonics should have became instead of what they did become, which was a forgotten team of very talented players. And then, of course, Utah, who had fought for years. They make the finals 2 straight years. And then that really leads into, Tim Duncan becoming an MVP caliber player and helping lead the Spurs to their first title in the last year of that decade in the '99 lockout shortened season. So I think you're going to get me writing again this week on what else I can do in the '90s.
Well, hopefully, and listen, for Chicago Bulls fans who have not had an opportunity to watch and witness this great pieces that you've put together thus far, they can never say that Boston Celtics fans and fandom will completely blindside the truth behind covering the NBA as the way it should be. He is a filmmaker extraordinaire, video producer, NBA historian, NBA junkie. Catch him and the Ode to 91 series of vignettes that chronicles the storylines and events of the 1991 NBA playoffs, where the Bulls dynasty has ultimately arrived. Eric, we really appreciate you hopping on and helping us reminisce during a great time of basketball.
Guys, my pleasure. And let me put you on the spot for a sec, all right? Conference finals are set. Raptors, Cavs, Warriors, Thunder. Who's going to the finals? What do you got?
Shaw, I'll let you start.
Well, I mean, we're just going to finishing up in the first half of our show with the conference finals previews, and I definitely picked up the Cavs and the Warriors to repeat as the NBA finals matchup. So I wish I could pick something sexier or more controversial, but my basketball IQ just won't allow me to. Maybe it's off the radar a little bit, but that's definitely what I'm going with.
Conspiracy theory here. The Toronto Raptors with Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan are going to figure out a way to pull off one of the greatest Eastern Conference Finals upsets. That's going to cause LeBron James to basically say, I'm parting ways with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. And it's going to be the Golden State Warriors versus the Toronto Raptors. Raptors in 7. And the Raptors in 6 and the Warriors in 6.
Hey, that X you hear right now is people clicking off of our show.
There's people tweeting me, asking me what exactly was I smoking and and how can they get it from me? I know. I gotta be extreme. I don't mind being the bad guy in this one.
Is that stuff legal yet? No, it's a shame Valanciunas is likely not going to play, and if he is, he's going to be hobbled because I think he would have a big effect on that series. And Cleveland's on a roll. Toronto's going to be tough. Kyle Lowry has answered the bell, but I don't see how they could come close to beating Cleveland 4 times.
I know.
Without Valanciunas. And I like Biyombo, and he played great today. But yeah, it's too bad. And I think Oklahoma, has really turned the corner. And I think with their victory, and not to hijack your segment here, but it's so interesting thinking about they beat the Spurs now, right? So are we watching Oklahoma finally climb that mountaintop?
That's a good point.
How does this play into KD's free agency? Obviously, if they go to the finals, they find a way to beat the Warriors and they go to the finals, Kevin Durant's not going anywhere.
At least not for the next year or two. Yeah, definitely.
Right, but has he felt him, Westbrook, the team, Coach Donovan? Does he feel now they've done enough and they're going in the right direction? And it's clear that they are to now stay. But I'm looking forward to a great series in the West, and as long as we have a great final this year, which I think we will, it'll be a successful NBA playoff for 2016. So, guys, thanks again for having me. Just wanted to put you two on the spot for a second there.
Oh, that's nice, man, because we don't often get that. But if there's anyone that we want to capture the essence and the greatness of this coming NBA Finals, it would definitely be you, Eric.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. Anytime you guys want to revisit this, let me know.
All right. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, with our special guest, Eric Newman.
They reminisce over you. Listen. Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast, discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right, man. Let's go ahead and talk about that. What an interview by the NBA on TNT. Kenny Smith.
Wait. You mean intervention?
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yeah, exactly. Charles Barkley. And listen, I was just absolutely floored that they were able to get away with just. I'm just surprised that Dwight Howard's publicists, PR people, didn't go running up in the middle of the segment just to shut it down or whatever. That's just absolutely nuts. But kudos to Ernie Johnson, Kenny Smith, and Charles Barkley for, as you would put it, Shaw, for that TNT intervention.
Yeah, they went right at him. Barkley was savage, man. Started asking him, why don't people like you? I mean, how do you answer something like that? Especially when you go on a telecast that for the most part is very jovial and very jokey. They very, to me, really even talk about basketball. They're there. It's just like barbershop talk and conversation the entire time, and now all of a sudden Howard goes on there and gets grilled. I'm just happy for him that Shaquille O'Neal wasn't there.
You know what, Shaw, though, it really kind of gives you that feeling, that aura that they don't really care much for Dwight Howard. Like they probably respect him as a person, like you're a really nice dude, like Carl Barkley said, you're a really great guy, whatever. But from an NBA player's perspective, you can really tell. And heaven forbid if Shaquille O'Neal was in that was sitting there as well too. Oh my goodness! I mean, did you see the fight that broke out between the Toronto Blue Jays and the Texas Rangers? Jose Batista and Roughneck Odor. I mean, that would be minuscule if you were to have Shaquille O'Neal and Dwight Howard in the same area in that intervention session. It would be just nuts. It would be an exorcism of NBA proportion.
It would be interesting to see who would be Odor and which one would be Batista. But I think Howard would, that's not a fight that he'd be willing to even have. He'd probably run and hide before something like that went down. But you're right about his PR people. They were probably very shocked and astonished and were begging TNT to cut. And I remember them even saying, damn, they went over 2 or 3 commercial breaks that they were supposed to have as a result of just getting good TV. And Howard really did a good job in answering the questions and trying to explain his case, if you will, to them as to why he's been perceived the way he has been over his career. And I think he might have even helped himself a little bit when it comes to free agency this summer. And I like the one part, though, they were talking about him like he wasn't even there. And it's like, well, he has to opt out. He has no choice. It'd be stupid if he doesn't. I'm like, the guy's right there. You know what I mean? He's right there.
So, and then they proceed to ask him, so what do you want to do, Ty?
Right. It was a little awkward at times, too. But kudos to Dwight Howard for handling it the way he did. He was definitely railroaded and bamboozled, if you will, but he handled it well, and I think the NBA community all thinks that as well.
Yeah, listen, I completely agree with you, Shaw. And before we move on to the next bit of news and stuff like that, I will say, though, it does make for a very interesting dynamic, because when you talk about Dwight Howard and what he's expected to bring to the table, if anyone is going to shell out the kind of money that he may command, it has to be with the mindset that he is going to be an important piece that is going to allow that team to become a better team than where it stands. So it's not even just Dwight Howard and his attitude. It's Dwight Howard making the necessary adjustments to help make the team that he's going to play for better. And I think ultimately, if he sounds as contrite as he did in that interview, then he's definitely gone a long way to kind of mending some fences amongst other GMs who have been questioning whether or not it would be wise to bring him into that fold for a team who's vying for championship aspirations. Speaking of the Houston Rockets, the team that Dwight Howard is planning to opt out from, even though he ain't officially say it during the TNT intervention, isn't it quite interesting that the Houston Rockets now, as far as their coaching candidacy goes, they have gone to the extreme. They've decided to go from ESPN to TNT. They went and interviewed Jeff Van Gundy. They've talked about the possibilities of having him return to be the Houston Rockets head coach. And then if that didn't work, they said, dang, since Kenny Smith did a bang-up job with his intervention with Dwight Howard, maybe we should talk to him about possibly being the head coach for the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, it's wild in Houston, and who knows who's going to end up landing that job. And same thing, what direction they want to go. The coach that eventually gets that position may not have a Dwight Howard to build around alongside James Harden. So they too will have to be very aggressive in free agency and pursuing some trades to bring some other talent around this team. If you think they're bad, this year with Dwight Howard and James Harden, imagine them without D12, and then having to rely on Capella as their starting center on a regular basis. Nice guy and all, but just not someone who I want to build my team around. So I think they're going to need to figure out that side of things first before they can even get a coach to commit to coming to that roster.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. They're going to have to shake things up. And I think part of that shakeup is really there needs to be a vote of confidence as Daryl Morey still being the GM for the Houston Rockets, as far as I'm concerned. I think before you do anything about head coaching positions and hirings, there needs to be stabilization from management and let that filter its way through, because I don't think that there's any head coach that wants to come into a situation where there seems to be uncertainty between management and between the players and personnel. They don't want to get into the middle of it, and it certainly will be a put off for any prospective head coaches, whether they're experienced or there are non-experienced or novices that want to be in the middle of that. All right, Shaw, let's talk about another interesting dilemma that's taken place in the coaching savagery, man. We did it in our previous show, so obviously the savagery must continue. Only this is a little more subtle. The Orlando Magic's head coach, Scott Skiles, basically says the Magic is gone for me. I'm done. So his second time around, rather than getting fired by the Orlando Magic, he decides to get ahead of the curve and he decides to resign.
Yeah, we said this at the beginning of the hire last year when it said, well, it could be good, but Skiles is a guy who grates on you, he wears on you, and eventually teams seem to want to get rid of him. Well, this time he got rid of himself. And it's rumored that he had some issues with the direction of the team, didn't like all the young guys there, but that's how they were when he got there. You know what I mean? So why would you go to a situation where you didn't want or didn't like the young talent if that's what they had? They didn't just all of a sudden get Elfrid Payton, just get Oladipo, get Vucevic. Those guys were there before you came, and Skiles and his way of handling things just seemed to continue to confuse me, and more so even the organizations in which he works for. So it'll probably be a long time before he gets another head coaching job. And Orlando Magic now have to scramble right before the draft and figure out what direction they're going to go with that. But it's an attractive job with a lot of young guys, and there have already been a lot of rumors to it. Hornacek being one, Blatt being another. Vogel came down there and interviewed as well too. So I don't think they're going to be long in their search and trying to find somebody to fill that role.
Well, look, I completely agree with you. I'll honestly tell you that one guy I would definitely like to probably see coaching that young core group, Mark Jackson. But we will soon see. I don't know if whether or not the Magic management is conducive for someone like Mark Jackson to feel secure about how he wants to go about changing the culture and the mindset of this team to play winning basketball. but it's going to be an interesting situation. But leave it to Scott Skiles, man. Scott Skiles figures out a way to always muddy up the waters out there in Orlando. He's done it twice. So clearly now the Magic have a lot of cleaning up to do before they get to the NBA draft. Interesting situation out in Memphis. They decided to part ways with Dave Yeager. Dave Yeager probably wanted to part ways with the Memphis Grizzlies a whole lot sooner. And so now there's speculation about Patrick Ewing being interviewed for the position as a head coach for the Memphis Grizzlies. I got to tell you, man, I'm a little happy about this one, Shaw, because it's long overdue that Patrick Ewing gets a true, honest, effort as being considered for a head coaching candidacy in any NBA team, man. The guy's put in the work, put in the years. He deserves an opportunity. He deserves a chance if it does happen. I'm just glad that the Memphis Grizzlies recognize that and have given him a legitimate shot to interview for this position.
Yeah, I think, it is about time. We've been hearing his name rumored for multiple years, and the Grizzlies seem like an organization that want to get some stability, especially with him being a big man, can be a nice influence on Gasol and Z-Bo. Yes, those guys are already established, but, I think he could still teach them a few tricks, if you will, playing the position that they both have played, at that 4 and 5 position. But if it doesn't happen, he'll definitely keep his job in Charlotte or move on to the next opportunity. I think Orlando might still have some interest in him as well. Didn't mention him in the last segment there, but they might have some interest in him after having interest in him last year. Ewing should definitely find somewhere to rest his hat at being head coach. Just hope to see it happen this summer. I don't know, but he's definitely been a guy long for the job, if you will.
Most definitely, man. Sean, finally, I know this one, man, is bugging you to no end. More coaching. This was not coaching savagery as much as it is like coaching confusion. Yeah. The Indiana Pacers have decided to make Nate McMillan their new head coach. The finites of the deal has not been completely worked out, but there's been strong reports that McMillan will get the job. And I know this one does not sit well with you at all, Sean, not because Nate McMillan is not deserving to be a head coach, but that this just makes absolutely no sense for the Indiana Pacers.
Well, listen, here's the thing. You fire Vogel or you don't renew his contract, let's be specific, because you're not happy about the direction the team was going in terms of not playing the fast pace, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what fast pace has Nate McMillan ever ran in his entire NBA career? Ever. He's a defensive-minded coach, maybe a little softer, if you will.
That's why they call his offense stalemate Nate, man.
You know what I mean? He might be a little softer, than Vogel when it comes to, not Vogel was a little prickly, I guess, at times. So maybe that's what Bird really wanted. But don't come out here and say, oh, yeah, Vogel didn't run the offense that we wanted. And then you go bring in a guy who brings in, arguably the worst offense, a worse offensive style and scheme than the prior coach that you had. I mean, that's just BS. Nate McMillan's a great guy. I have nothing against him, but from the organizational standpoint, from what they were saying that they're trying to do in the direction that they want to go, this makes absolutely no sense. So I'm just not buying it. I think they just had a problem with Vogel, and they're going to just do what they want to do from here on out.
Well, now they're going to do what they want to do, man. Unfortunately, it's at the expense of one of the great players in the game, Paul George. I'll be very interested to see how Nate is going to incorporate a style of offense that really allows George's game to flourish while still allowing some of these younger pieces in their games to elevate as well. As it's long overdue, man. But ultimately, the product for the Pacers is going to have to equate to them being a team that that's going to return back to the premise that they were 2-3 years ago when they were the talk of the Eastern Conference. Shaw, what an awesome show. Listen, nothing short of the time that we took in order to get to this destination, to this point, but it was so much worth it, man. So much great stuff to discuss. The NBA finals, the conference finals now is in our vision, is right down there with the NBA finals not too far ahead. But man, some really, really great stuff to kind of lead us into and rounding out what has been really historically great season thus far.
Absolutely. I mean, again, one of the better shows we've had, definitely as we close out the season here. Get ready for the NBA finals as we move into these conference finals, as you alluded to. And we just continue to come every single week, with different topics, different ideas. I really love that segment, 0 to 91, getting a chance to reminisce on NBA history and Chicago Bulls and Larry Bird and the Celtics and, the great Supersonics teams that started to form, Run TMC, all of that. I mean, that's just really fun for us, and we hope that's fun for you guys as well. But, make sure you're tuning in with us, especially next week and on all the platforms. As my man always says in the beginning of the show, we also are now on Google Play Music. So on your Android devices, if you have Google Music, you can find our show there. And we're also on Roku now, on Shaw Sports channel. You just go search your new channels on your Roku devices, search for Shaw Sports, and you'll find all the NBA Baseline episodes right there on the channel, guys. So make sure you're tuning in and listening to us and rocking with us for the rest of these NBA playoffs and beyond, as they say, man. Can't wait to get back at it again next week, brother. Can't wait.
Most definitely, man. And so for the Baseline, we'd like to thank our guest, Eric Newman. Much respect due. Doing some excellent stuff. Once again, we encourage you to check him out. Catch him on Twitter at Coach E New. He's available on Instagram and Twitter. And definitely go to Slam Magazine, go to Slam Online, and check out the vignettes so far. Ode to 91. Get your history right, guys. It's really great when you have guys like Eric Newman putting together pieces that help us really round to form the importance of what guys in our previous eras and generations have done to make the NBA the way that it is, how important the 91 season really became that turning point, the passing of the guard, the passing of the torch, where Michael Jordan and the greatness that then ensued. So just great stuff all around, and we would definitely, hopefully, will be able to bring him back onto the show to continue further discussions as we continue to give you more of what we love to do in discussing all things for the NBA. So for the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys, and we'll catch up with you next time.